Good evening, everyone. Why don't you come on up front if you want to move up closer so I can hear you better, Joe. He's got to leave early. All right, well, let's get started. It's a little after 6, and we'll get this thing moving. And yeah, if you do have to leave early, feel free. We're scheduled till 7:30, so. First, thank you for coming out on a Monday night and spending a little time with us talking about the project in the club. We appreciate it. My name is Brad Stripmatter, and I'm the chair of the task force that's been asked to move the project forward that was presented in May by the board of directors, discussed in July, and so here we are. We're just getting started on our engagement process to get input from the membership, and so we're excited about that. We've had a little bit of that going on, but we're just really getting to the meat of it, so we're looking forward to good commentary. I want to introduce just briefly the task force members that are here, so that if you would like to, you can seek them out at any time during the next several weeks and months as this goes on. I know we've got Tom Walker, who's sitting in the back looking at his phone. Perfect. Mike Young, who's sitting right here. Steve Taylor, right behind him. And I think that's all of the task force tonight. So first, the purpose of the task force is to really gather feedback over the next several weeks and a couple of months and use that feedback to help reevaluate the project. Eventually, the task force will make a recommendation to the board of directors as to what we believe is an appropriate project that makes sense for the majority of the membership. And so that is our task. Tonight, we are not trying to convince anyone of anything. What we're really here to do, first, Jay Palou, who is our architect who's working on the project, is going to go through a little bit of the history of the process and how decisions were made, what was considered, and sort of how we got here. It helps fill in a lot of blanks about things that were considered and maybe discussions, decisions, those sort of things. You can see the evolution of the project. So that's helpful. I think everybody so far that's seen it, either the board, the task force, other of the membership, it's been helpful just to kind of gain an understanding of what's sort of happened so far. So we'll do that, and then really the rest of the session is just meant to be question, answer, commentary. And when I say answer, we'll give input, or we'll give any feedback we can give you about what's happened in the process, or maybe why something was done, but we're really not debating the future of the project necessarily, just trying to help people understand it, and then listen to your feedback. That's our goal for this evening. So one question that's come up that I just wanted to address initially, because I think it helps set the tone for the entire session, is the project in its entirety as it was presented in May is under review. So the elements in the project, the programmatic elements, what is included, tennis, golf, fitness, dining, etc. That's all up for consideration. Now I will say this, we do have a need for reconstruction of the pool house and the facilities that house the equipment in the pool use. It is failing from many aspects, so we've got to do something along those lines related to pool and most likely tennis. But the programmatic elements that go along with it and what's involved in the project to date is what we're studying. So we're not making any assumptions that everything we have in it has to be there, but we're just sort of taking all the feedback in, and then as we gather that, we'll make a recommendation to the board. The board ultimately will make the decision about what the project looks like, share that information with the membership, and as that process goes along, you'll see communication about that. So that's sort of where we stand and kind of where we're going. We hope by the end of 2018, we have a recommendation, and the board takes action and moves forward with the project here in the early part of 2019. Anything I forgot, Dave? Very good. All right, so I'm going to let Jay get started and introduce Jay Palou. He's with Alley Pointer Maquetto, who's been the architect so far. He's going to share a bunch of information with you, probably pretty quickly. If you have questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, when we get done with his presentation, there'll be lots of time to ask and clarification.
Great. Thank you. Hi, Jay with Alley Pointer Maquetto Architecture. I'm one of the architects. We have a mechanical engineering team, structural engineering team, and then on this as well. And then tonight, Audrey Buckley, who's project manager, architect from Alley Pointer, is joining to keep me telling the truth. What the task force asked is for me to go through a quick summary review of some of the exhibits we've been sharing with previous board members, previous board staff, and then this slide is a starting point at December 21st, 2016. This is one of the early presentations that's going to show you some of the examples of where the starting was. There was work in advance of this, a lot of work in advance of this by some members of the audience. I'm going to ask Duke for some guidance on some of these things since he was involved early on and other members. So we picked up at a point where the board was considering how to program the replacement of the building and what items to include within that, and start to lay out a design, do some pricing, and pull together a bid package for that. There's really multiple phases. This is going to focus on the new pool house building or the replacement of the current pool house building. We'll touch on some other amenities around, and we'll also sort of highlight in the schedule when this renovation occurred, because you'll notice there's sort of fairly serious consideration of the pool house building, then there was kind of a pause in the overall schedule, and that's because we shifted focus onto the planning for this space, the construction documents. Once construction started on this, then design picked up again concurrently with construction to where we finished. At a high level, I want to show some of the process. We talked a lot about programming, so early on we went through a list of what spaces are needed, an evaluation of the existing facility, and worked through with the board and staff at the time on what sort of amenities to include. That's the programming, as well as perhaps some conversations about what presentations will be made and what timing. These are two sketches that were starting points. The one on the left was from a previous consultant who helped the club do some master planning before we were hired to talk through what could occur in this replacement building for the pool house. The sketch on the right is a variation. We call it concept diagram B for this, but it was a modification of that to look at the early programmatic elements. The reason I show this is, if you notice, the outside consultant had suggested the replacement building include a kitchen, a grill, which is indoor seating, men's and women's locker rooms, which the current building has, cardio and strength training, which does not currently, as you know, is not included in that building, fitness studio, which that language means a multi-purpose room, could be spinning, one day could be yoga, a tennis shop moved over as well, and then some outdoor dining, and that was the starting point when we were engaged. To the right's the first version of that. We started almost immediately at that time working with the board through how does this actually fit on this site. If you've all been through a planning process, you know the early diagrams don't always accommodate all of the things that are not yet known. In this case, we began almost immediately looking at the size of the kitchen. Kitchens can be sized by a number of factors. We do a lot of hospitality work, including restaurants, so we size them based on the equipment, which is based on the number of either pool visitors you want to serve food to, the number of dishes you want to move through it at what time, and then obviously what the chef wants to prepare. So we started doing some benchmarking. We also early on did some visualization with the board. What do you want the outdoor dining to look like? Obviously, when you start any process like this, everyone thinks about what you have, unless it's a new build with no precedent. So you have to kind of go through this process of this is what you have, it's a remnant, what do you want it to be in the future? We use a lot of examples of case studies where we go through other projects we've designed to sort of say, this is the size of the dining area it serves, this is what we worked through with that restaurant owner or chef on the menu, and this is the equivalent size of the kitchen. This is just one in downtown that we use as a precedent. We use Paragon. I like this as an example, which is now since changed names, but it's a really efficient kitchen based on the variety of menu that the previous restaurant Paragon and the current one Kith and Kim serve. So we use this as a precedent. We went through some examples of what current workout facilities provide. Some we designed, some we didn't design. Amenities within that. We talked about programmatically what the training simulator could look like. How many bodies do you want to have in the studio space? What's the extent of the possible uses? Personalized training. Do you want the capacity to do spinning? Spinning involves bike storage. What's that mean? Basic early questions, and that comes up with an early program, and we started with that on this project as well. Once we did to those early meetings, we started to dig into how's it laid out on the site. And this is the first time tonight I'm showing a site plan, you'll see in this case the tennis courts are existing in this drawing. The pool is existing below. And our early goal was to stay within that space that the current pool house sits and the covered picnic area just to the east covers. The story of this site's you're going to quickly just see is there are constraints to everything fitting on this site, and we've kind of been battling those constraints throughout. So later versions, you'll see the first modification. One of the early changes when we did analysis on the kitchens was the kitchen got bigger. The kitchen got considerably bigger based on the early diagrams, based on the number of meals served and what we wanted to do within that. You'll also start to see right sizing of the restrooms. Early on, there was one set of restrooms, and if you've been through the restrooms over there now, you know they need to be durable because it's a lot of wet feet, it's a lot of wet towels. So you start to sort of think about, in any aquatics environment, how durable those need to be. They also, at the time, we were servicing tennis out of this, and there's no specialized restrooms for tennis. So tennis players would be using the same thing that the wet users of the pool would use. And also those that are dining would be using the same restrooms. So that quickly became a concept of, is that what we want, or do we want to segregate those? And you'll see later versions, they eventually floated apart. We looked at some denser options, different ways to configure it with an upper level. When you start introducing a second level, you start to get 2 stairs, you start to get an elevator, and that obviously adds some cost and complexity. So we looked at what could we do to expand the site. So again, we were early on experimenting with diagrams of what this could be. We started to play around with, in this version you'll see the upper is not this is actually a lower level. We're just showing it in this version of the board of where it could be in the site. We started to experiment with a single entry. We start to segregate for the first time bathrooms for tennis and fitness that are different than the aquatic ones. The aquatic ones are only used when the pool is open, but fitness center was going to be used year-round, or will be used year-round. So we started to sort of see the split. We start to see bathrooms being carved out just for the dining, and you start to see the outdoor patio. One thing that sort of stayed true throughout this is early on we thought, based on our experience on the site, the preferred location for outdoor dining was on the east side. The views of the course are better. You get away from the parking lot. You have views down over the course. Would be a nice evening as the sun sort of hides behind the building. And that sort of remained consistent. But the building starts to really grow to accommodate all the program things we identified early on. We start to put it on the site, and we're starting to play with the geometry of the building and the idea of a snack bar, how we service the pool. So again, these are just iterations. You're going to see multiple iterations of the concept, multiple iterations of building, but each one there's subtle tweaks that at any point, any aspect of this I can dig back into, but I'm kind of skipping through meetings and months. You'll notice a few programmatic elements. We're just sort of holding a placeholder on a lot of these. The existing pool building that's out there now also houses a small shop area where there's tools to cut wood. There's a cart storage area, and all the deck furniture during the winter gets stored in the building, so there's a large storage area. It's also a place where, for a number of Happy Hollow kids events, the equipment gets stored as well. There's laundry. So some of those programmatic elements, along with the key one we identified early on, which was if you're going to serve this number of outdoor dining areas, the pool, and then your peak events, we need more storage for the restaurant compared to contemporary standards, and we wanted to prevent some of the shifting of materials from the main building over to the pool building. So you'll start to see a much larger sort of group of storage spaces within this. Again, we go back to case studies. Since it's a new concept, we were showing examples of how each of these compare to other restaurants, just to get an idea that we're not overbuilding any part of the kitchen, or if your restaurant space that you're serving needs more storage space. So again, benchmarking, you'll see each one of these we kind of went through. This is 74 seats, 108 seats, 76 seats, just to kind of give us some guidance along the way. And then we started to block out the building. These are some early versions. The final versions end up looking nothing like this, but you'll see for the first time as designers we're starting to make massing out of the diagrams for us to get a sense of what the building could look like. I think the part that remains on this is we still like dining on the east, kind of facing that side, and that part's remained true. We start to struggle though with will it all fit. So At one of the midpoints of the design process, we kind of went back to a process to show the board what would happen if, this is the base map of what you have now, 6,000 square feet, 1,300 square feet, and then this is tennis that's existing and what that is. And this is where we sort of moved to, with this building kind of growing in size, now 14,000. What would happen if we kept golf and tennis sort of in this footprint? You lose the advantage of having tennis and proximity to the restrooms. You lose some other things we really liked in some of the schemes, but we thought it was worth exploring. And we also started to discover help from staff to understand what it's like to shovel snow off this tennis dome up against the building. Some of the kind of key operational things that we were learning about too. One key thing early on we identified is if you're going to do this sort of investment in this zone for fitness and tennis that are going to be kind of year-round activities, especially if the dining occurs year-round. When the pool is empty and perhaps got some ice and snow and leaves in it, and when the dome is up, what's the experience between those two? And how do you make a facility that looks onto a dome covered in ice or an empty pool, one that really meets the standards of the club, when most of the venues on this facility, on this campus, have a really great views, take advantage of the site. So that also kind of became a concern for the designers and for the team. This variation was a true 2-story, and what could we get out of this for 2 stories if we kind of held it back and we can get up to 25,000? Again, variations on layouts. We shifted then to thinking about if we go with the longer items, where does the program land now? And these are just diagrams that walked us through that. We ended up with a 2-story concept that brought back stairs and elevator. But again, each time we're identifying key things that were priorities for that group we were working with at the time. There's always been a focus on one central entry for this building, and the most recent versions, I think, that you saw in June, showed where you would be welcomed at this building by a single staff member, which would welcome you and send you towards the kids' areas, or welcome you, send you to the restaurant, or welcome you and check you into the swimming area. So security was a high priority to make sure that everything was accounted for, lots of eyes, and quite frankly, so that they could serve every guest member to the standards of the club. In this version, we had a lot of the fitness moved to the 2nd story. And this was sort of a critical concept because when you move fitness to the upper level, you'll see how 1 elevator, 2 stairs, and this small footprint is not a very efficient use of any of that extra cost. And I'll go back a slide. The walk now from the front, back, past the locker room, all the way here to the elevator and up, kind of began to show that there's some concerns with this site for fitting. And we started to mass up what a 2-story building would look like, and you can again begin to imagine cost and 2 stories and quite a complicated site to make work in that way. I'm going to shift, because of the size of these files, I broke it up into a couple of bunches. So about this time, I'm going to describe one of the concepts that the board asked us to look at, was a number of the programmatic elements that grew to the 2-story option being added was dining. And if you think about, there are other ways to accommodate dining besides putting it in a new building. And one of those things was that it's not just additional room for dining, but it was a different experience. And that was being driven by this idea of casual dining being difficult for families with children in this building. So we looked at an option to modify the starlight. And the starlight, as you know, on this drawing is shadowed out here. It was recently, in the last few years, the project you completed. I have a single slide I want to show of that. So one of the options we did explore with the board was, what could we do to modify the starlight to pull the dining program back out of the pool house to bring that building back in size? And this is a concept that was shared. There were a couple of versions of this. It included a light touch. We were really focused on not redoing good work that was done in the starlight, but just adding to it. So again, no one likes to renovate something and have the next group or board come in, remove things that were just repaired or replaced. So we were adding casual seating in the center and booths. We added banquettes and niches. We looked at what could we do with high top tables, where could televisions be added to the Starlight, really changing the feel of the Starlight so that a policy change could occur where it could be casual certain nights and still have some areas that felt more formal in other settings, and that was explored. There was some preliminary costing discussed at that time. And this gets us up to about the time when the full interior of this space you're in now was just working its way through design. So the focus sort of shifted then to this. So there's sort of a
Is that
lot.
adding to the footprint, or is that
This
same footprint of the building? Or not?
of the main building?
Of the Starlight?
Yeah, there was no addition to the Starlight. It was really just thinking about ways to reconfigure the seating within it, add some diversity of space within that.
So that means we didn't get it right the first time?
I think you met the requirements the first time. It just didn't allow for casual dining to be added the way that we were challenged with providing it. I guess that's the way it's phrased to us.
There was $750,000 spent in there, and I'm not upset about anything, but it wasn't used, and 90% of the time when it's empty, so
Yeah.
this may be a good idea. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no, we were also early challenged with one of the options the previous board had us looking at was an addition to the outdoor dining off the Starlight, which could, again, replace what was being proposed or has now shifted in concept at least over to the new building. Again, we wouldn't do modifications to the kitchen over here, and if we kept the kitchen over there simpler, it'd be a way you pay more to add the deck on, but you save some money in kitchen over there. Those were all sort of discussions the board have had, and I think if you have specific questions on that, each year we get a few board members on and we get a few board members off, so the knowledge, kind of some of those early discussions are still some of it with the board, but then there's some board members who were part of that aren't on the board now. Okay.
Are we still moving to the thought process, or where are we?
Yes, so this picks up right now, and the time frame, this is under construction, it has just started. So we took a pause with that discussion about what to do with the Starlight, what to do with the pool house building while we finished up this. And this, as you all know, was 3 months of construction, but another 6 months in advance of that of planning, budgeting. So the drawing I'm going to show you, this is an actual construction document for this phase of work, which really butted right up against the previous money spent. There was really no work done in the pub or the Starlight as a part of this renovation. There's again, no need to do that. And that's where we restarted. And this now restarts us, this is December of 17. So construction in this space didn't start until the day after New Year's. We were in for permit in November. So we go in for permit, we're working through the final modification with the subcontractors. We restarted design planning then for the pool house building. And that's where the conversation started back up about dining over there versus over here for casual. The first meeting we had, we talked about, okay, we're still now, we've taken 6 months off, but we're still in the same position of how much program do you want to fit into this site versus putting back here or some other options. So we restarted the process of saying, what's the final programming we want over here? This is your existing, this is one of the concepts we showed, and again, we drew it so it matched, because early on, there's really no architecture assigned to these, and we were all getting caught up with what's the new pool building want to look like. It could look exactly like this building. It just would be one cost versus something different, which might be a difference. So we drew these diagrams specifically to show it could be a campus setting. The second option we looked at was what if we went back to a simplified new snack shack in a existing renovated pool building, and then moved out all of the 12-month-a-year functions into a new building. And the 12-month-a-year functions, if you think about that, that's tennis, happens outdoor, then it moves into the dome. That's fitness, which happens all year long. Locker rooms that relate to that, kids' activities which relate to that. This building then would be temporary, occupied just during the pool, or perhaps a little early when the weather's nice and a little late when the weather's nice and the pool's closed. It solved sort of some issues, but it produced a big question mark here. And as Brad alluded, if you've been through that building, there's a lot of needs over there. Before it was a pool house building, it was a cart storage building. It has a lot of questionable infrastructure. So we said existing pool building could stay, but we knew we were going to probably spend as much money as a new building on fixing it. This was one of the options we looked at. We also, at this time, we'd heard enough feedback about the parking lot. We took a quick stab at what could we do to redesign the parking lot in a way that got rid of the diagonal parking, allowed people to pull in, park, back out, and leave in the same way to prevent sort of the need to drive all the way through and turn around. So we were looking at those. Drawings like this, have impacts around the borders, but it was just a quick concept, future state. This option also was discussed because it would allow us to phase things. So you could have, this is sort of phase one. Phase two would be if you want to move fitness out of the building over in tennis. This also got some pushback because obviously we're building over a tennis court. And we know that's disruptive. We know that would change things. When we did that, as we typically do, we don't, what does this want to be? It's not designed yet. We came up with some ideas of precedents of how casual it could be. We went through some advantages of the program and design, and that was a discussion. Based on this meeting in December of 17, some good feedback came from the board, and they said, wow, it'd be great if we could keep it all in one building. And there's a lot of advantages to that. You can think about one set of foundations, one set of skins, one construction period for disruption to the members. A lot of advantages. And we're transitioning through GM at the time, but we knew the previous GM's priority, and we know the current GM's priority is don't make any major change that impact my costs for staffing and operations without kind of thinking that through. So we were thinking that through here as well. One building saves some of those efforts. The board gave us some feedback, and we spent a couple of weeks and refined it to come back what they said. Take a look at one longer building, single story. We don't want the elevators, we don't want the stairs. We're willing to take a look at losing some parking here, if we could do that. So we did a quick look at that. This is a blow up of that option. We were doing some equipment shed back here. We're keeping all the tennis courts. We still have covered patio on the right side, and we just started sort of laying out what those sort of things could be. There's some advantages to this plan. I like getting cardio and strength away from looking at an empty pool. We still have some struggles when the dome is up. But for the first time, you're starting to see golf simulators. Training come back. They were gone for a little while from the program, but they came back here in this version. And you'll see sort of some centralized core functions. In this case, we still have a snack stand with a kitchen. So this services the pool, and the kitchen is basically a replacement of what you have now in this version. We looked at a shorter version that's stacked. This is still this 2-story option. What could that be? And we did a quick take on a simplified version where we tried to keep the geometry sort of simple. Again, thinking we have an uphill battle on the 2-story version. That would be a lot more skin, added cost to elevator and stair, but simplifies things. And then the upper floor, large cardio studio, restroom fitness, and golf simulators. We looked at a campus option with the 2 and what that could be. Now this is the first dig into the program of the 2. Before we just talked about in concept. Here you see cardio, strength, tennis, golf simulators, fitness, and then you do end up with, before we split the restrooms, because again I think no matter what you do, you're going to have wet restrooms just for the pool that are of a durability and size. You're going to have others for dining, fitness, tennis that are of a different quality. But over here they're all connected to one sort of set of infrastructure. Here we were splitting infrastructure, and there's some downside to that aspect. We also kind of formalized in this discussion with the board that they really like the idea of one single building. So that's sort of one of the things that came out of those diagrams. Let's focus on, for staffing, for convenience for members, simplicity, one building. This is the version that came out of that. I don't have a date on this, but by my memory, this was probably 2.5 or 3 weeks later. And then we do the normal sort of pool house functions facing the pool. And then our kitchen, which serves outdoor deck, serves indoor dining, and pool sort of centralized. So once we sort of figured out, and maybe it took us too long to get there, if we could take a tennis court and shift the site concept a little bit, it really allows it to be a really nice sort of site use. This did not or does not preclude the program changing though. This layout I think works well if dining is in or dining is out, if fitness is considerably smaller or enlarged, or this accommodates expansion. At any time in 20 years of the public meeting here about needs, if the club has changed its needs, this building is highly flexible for that regard with that sort of central core concept. There's a couple of additional slides that relate to this. You see the program sort of firming up. We started to get into sort of layouts. These are large files, so they take a second to flip. Oops, I skipped over. I'll try and go back. And we jump ahead to February. I'm going to have to, there we go. So in February, we really then kind of had the concepts laid out, and we really firmed up what the actual programming to be included was. These are amenity slides that I think some of you have witnessed were shared with the club. Go ahead.
Just where is that programming data coming from? Is that just coming from the board? Or how do we track how many people use the fitness center?
Good question.
Where did that data come from?
Good question. So each space within the building was influenced by a mixture of board, but I'd say primarily driven by discussions with the tennis pro, discussions with those who actually program fitness or teach classes here. We met with a number of individuals, all on the sort of staff side. In the kitchen, we sat down with the chef. So we tried to go through and have someone on the Happy Hollows side inform us. A few board members stepped up who had particular interest. For example, Cleet stepped in to guide us through some of the fitness selection to present that back to the board. But it was a combination. Dave's been very good at allowing us access to staff to do that. We've always had, when we were first selected, we were given the past survey information based on demographics of the club and use. So some of that was in there as well. As far as the golf simulator goes, this was influenced. Again by the quantity. It wasn't necessarily influenced by staff. That was more of a board decision. But what to include in the training was definitely influenced by staff. There's 3 bays included that are more standard, and 1 that's larger for teaching, club sizing, training. The seating areas around are based on some best practices. And then a number of members of the board who are here can tell you the clubs they went to and visit to look at peer institutions. Casual dining, we looked at some examples of what are better examples to kind of meet the Happy Hollows standard but allow it to be comfortable for grandkids and children, noise, views. The sports courts are sort of a natural function of, we were following some other trends. They're also the least expensive options, so that area just to the west of the site plan that we have basketball and pickleball on, those are just lines on the court. It's a nice multi-purpose space, so those are included. One thing of note, there is some reconfiguration of the dome that's been proposed that's adding from 4 to 5 indoor courts. We know during the summer in Omaha in the area, there's lots of places to play tennis. In the winter, that's a great amenity for your pro and for your club to have indoors, so we're adding 1. And then the pickleball option is it's a current trend, and we're making sure we can accommodate that. We see the popularity of that in other clubs. Fitness, tennis pro shop. I guess you've seen some of these in the pool support building. There will be all new pool equipment incorporated into this, and we have Larkin Aquatics out of Kansas City who's been guiding us through the process, evaluating your current equipment, looking at life cycle ages, etc. Sort of normal stuff. We also went through visualization. This is in March. You've seen lots of sort of schematic sketches, and I'd like to say it's a linear process. It never really is. Both internally on our team, we have to get an idea of what the sort of visual should look like, but we also do a process where we include decision makers from the board. So the board went through a process where we do a lot of, Alley Pointer Marquette does a lot of historic preservation. That's sort of one of the things we do. So we love digging into sort of what your building today is, what it was historically. So we did some visualization with the board where we showed them 3 sort of tracks. I'm going to flip through these pretty quick. Roof lines, designs that could sort of influence materials. These are a few slides pull out a much bigger discussion, but as the pool house building plan was firmed up, this is the first option. A series, we kind of do these quick tags, so we have 3 options. This is Scheme A boxes, what it could look like to meet the program with more of a refined look, contemporary. There was an early discussion about this pool house building not competing with the historic nature of this building. I think you all know the last slide I'm going to show you, which was after feedback from the club, we shifted back to having it be a contemporary of this building, more of a campus building. But early on, the direction was let's don't do that. Let's have it sort of be a new addition to the campus, but not compete with the grandeur of the main clubhouse. Option B was gable roofs. So you'll see sort of, again, that's a low-slung building, but just a little bit of the roof popping up. Where glass has taken advantage in all 3 of these options with good views. The final one you'll see is a tip roof. This one eventually became the one that was moved forward by the board. Which, final development, these early sketches are sort of still things that Audrey and I see that are sort of yet to be refined. The tip roof had some advantages. It sort of hid some mechanical equipment. Again, there are economic impacts to all these things, but putting mechanical units directly above that center core has some economic advantages, and that hits some of it. So we left that meeting sort of with the tip roof option, and then you saw some refinement of that. I'll show you the last versions. We also have done a lot of studies on the tennis configuration. This is what you currently have. The condition of these are different, so we did some analysis. We actually we had a consultant come and do an x-ray of the courts to see what was salvageable, what needed to be replaced. We looked at some options to move to the north on the driving range. We looked at options to reconfigure your dome so that we could kind of make that work. We eventually this option takes some parking, but we settled on the version that is in the most recent plans. And I'm going to shift to the final bit here.
How much parking does that take out?
We had different versions, but at one time we were down as many as 40 stalls on the one version. But if we could reconfigure, did you ask the question?
No, the last version.
Okay, yeah. The last version, I don't remember it was a net gain or loss around 20 stalls, but if we could take a look at reconfiguring some other aspects, diagonal parking is not very efficient at all. So there's some constraints if we can go to perpendicular parking. The trade-off is the drive aisles get slightly larger, which means we're moving every light standard, which means we're affecting curbs. So the overall solution, we think we can accommodate more parking on site, but you should probably hold off, do minimum work until you decide to take that step, because it's going to involve curb, gutter, light infrastructure work to accommodate it. We also, as we sort of tipped our toes at, and again, we're only as good as the information we have, and there's certain aspects as we learned about balls landing in your parking lot. There's some other bigger issues that are a lot more complicated than us just drawing lines. Are easy to draw. And as we learned about that, there might be some reconfiguration that could make sense. We're also keenly aware, and we've been talking with Dave a lot about this, we don't want to build that parking lot up, spend a lot of money just for 4 or 5 peak events. So I know Dave's doing some observations about when your parking lot's full, how many events that are, and if it's worth sort of building the parking lot for Easter Sunday or your big events, versus perhaps even doing some parking remote for staff, which they do some of that already. Or we saw some examples where they're parking on parts of, you go to the Rose Bowl, they park on the golf course. Perhaps your driving range, there's a part of the driving range that could be parked on for those peak events. So I think there's a good conversation about parking, what we can do for safety overall. I think it's just a bigger conversation. This is the first version of the tip that came out. It's sort of a little more refined. This is the entry lobby. And again, one of the priorities, especially with since Dave was involved, was how can we have one point of contact when this building is operating 12 months of the year, where everyone who walks in is welcomed. Behind this desk in our most recent design concepts were security cameras that gave you full visualization of the fitness area, so you don't have to have a staff member there as well. Visualization of other aspects of the building, so that one staff member could open it up, welcome everybody, and we wouldn't have to have, until a peak event occurred, we wouldn't have to have more staff than that. Fitness to the north with its views out over the driving range. The 4 golf training bays facing east with a little bit of view out on the golf course with the putting green, chipping surface, and then sort of the social concept of that. The back bay is sized for the Club Pro based on needs to store clubs for sizing, teaching. We did have a multi-purpose youth activity space, and we showed it visualization with some things that could occur in it, but in a lot of ways, this is the most flexible part of the new building, not really knowing what in 5 years or 10 years is going to be the trend for youth, and also not knowing how well they'll react to this. So the room is really flexible. It could be a lot of things, but for this visualization, it had some gaming equipment. It's also proximate to, it's got a door directly out to the pickleball and basketball court, so we could see this as sort of an interior space that supports some of your outdoor youth activity, space for in between tennis lessons for youth, that sort of thing. There's a small nook off of the hallway in the current design that would allow, kids to be in this space next to dining when mom and dad or grandpa and grandma are in the main dining room. The main dining room in this concept, the bar and pool's behind sort of my back, has views out on the golf course, central fireplace, and again, I forget, Audrey, how many total TVs we had in this, but it was a priority. It was really meant to be a casual environment where a Creighton basketball game could be watched with a menu that could still meet your standards, but a very different atmosphere as acoustically. This is the east side of the building, which has the outdoor sort of deck with fire pits, with the idea being the pool closes at the end of the pool season, Labor Day, and you have a couple of months for sure where this will still be a night like tonight. This would be an October night. This could be an outdoor dining experience. The kitchen was sized for that. Could be a nice advantage. And then obviously before the pool opens, again in the spring, and you wouldn't have to walk by an empty pool to get to it. So it sort of fit well on the site once we sort of made that transition. Before I skip to the redesign of the exterior, this is sort of where the final plans landed, and at a very high level, one sort of entry point for the full-time building purpose. Got a little side entry past the lifeguard sort of gate again, so everyone is welcomed. This is the basic program right here, is a replacement of the building that's there now. Locker rooms, pool equipment, laundry, staff restroom. This is the kitchen. The dining is the part that's expandable or contractible. If the dining goes away as a part of the interior, the kitchen obviously stays. It just loses some equipment. It's downsized. Instead of having 14 foot of hood, we end up with 7 or 8 foot of hood. As you go this direction, you have a center core of functions that will remain kind of regardless of what pieces come and go. You have restrooms, mechanical, staff. And then here's where you have sort of ringing that are amenities. Golf practice, studio, which would be yoga, personalized training, cardio equipment. This is that kids area with the direct access to the sort of pickleball, basketball. And then this is the tennis pro shop. And option right here is the lobby, which would be sort of the hub for all these things to happen. That's the sort of concept plan. And then this is, we obviously got very direct feedback. The board asked us to re-engage. We got some negative feedback on the tip roof, so we dug right back in and went to some options in June of what could we be, and these are just different sketches, and I put these in for process to show kind of the different exploration. And I think the solution that came out of that being a much more compatible building with Happy Hollow's main building is a good solution. We were excited about it. It's just different, a change in plans, and we embrace that change. And I think here you'll see outdoor shade structure, which is nice to break down the scale, and the materials being brick. We're still very conscious of cost on this, so there are some materials that are still in here that are not at the same level of this building, because that's what we were running up against the whole time. This is a brick building with a clay tile roof, and we weren't doing clay tile. We're doing some materials that were less expensive, but more in line with trends today. You can see sort of what eliminating those tennis courts, sliding the building sort of onto that pad does for the whole building to open up into sort of really nice views. Brad, I think that took longer than the last one, sorry, but some good questions in the process.
Absolutely, thank you, Jay. So you can see there's a lot of process in this, a lot of options, a lot of details of those options that we didn't go over, but there's just a lot of information. So at this point, we're just welcoming feedback, and again, on questions and answers, some of them are just going to be good questions that we'll consider. We're taking great notes on this. We'll combine this with all the feedback that we get, and so that's what we're here to do next is listen. I will ask that if you have a question, let us bring you a mic so everyone can hear, because it's a big room. There's a lot of space.
How all these things are going to be used, and will they all be used? And the only reason I ask that is because the big expense that was spent here several years ago, that hasn't been used, and it wasn't that much nicer than it was before. And I don't mean that as a negative, but I think it's a good question. The only other question I have is that this is basically a traditional building. Pretty exquisite.
Can you hold the mic up to your mouth?
Pretty exquisite, but it is old. And a lot of this looks very modern, but obviously that'll all blend together well. Only two things. How do we determine how do you determine if all of these things that the money's been spent for will be used? Okay.
Yeah, so I'll take the first question first, second question second. So pricing, right now as a club, you purchase no materials for this building, whatever size it is. So until you purchase materials, until you get a full schedule, which determines how long the general contractor's on site, and until those are locked in, we don't know the exact price. But we've been budgeting throughout the process, and there's lots of tricks to do that. There's square footage numbers. What we like to do is work through with a general contractor early on to fill in as much information as we have that we can commit to. Thus, we brought on, for example, the pool consultant early and had him go through the building with me. We wrote down the model numbers. We talked about age, just so we could inform that cost estimate, because the first cost estimate always goes somewhere along the lines of replace all the pool equipment, and it's $295,000. It's a real whiff because they don't want to be caught with the wrong numbers. And once we kind of work that through, we said we can save these things. These got to go. So the numbers theoretically change a lot until we get to, but they should be towards the end pretty accurate. They start getting subcontractor input, and that's a delicate thing, because if you ask the same subcontractor to price this thing over 15 iterations, about the third time they just stop to pay as much attention or ask when they're going to get hired, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of these iterations we couldn't go back to all the subcontractors to get feedback, so we rely on that general contractor to sort of give us updates to the best of their ability. We also tried to provide a lot of benchmarking, so we can tell you, we won't tell you what Paragon's kitchen costs, that owner, we can kind of go back and say these are costs and this is where we compare. So we try to do that throughout. Some specialty things, I got no idea, so we called, like the guys that put in your original dome, we tracked them down through the help of the club, gave them a call and say, hey, do you think you can add on to this dome still? And if you can, what's the cost? And we kind of have a whole series of numbers, and then we have contingencies that sort of add up. There's one thing that's true on all projects, though. The more scope you add, the more time it takes to build, and the more materials you use, and the cost goes up. So there's certain things when we showed the board examples of 2 buildings versus 1. The advantage is you don't have to do them both at the same time. You can phase it. The downside is you've got twice the skin, you've got extended general conditions. So some of that's more intuitive than hard numbers of is it X versus Y. So we tried to kind of do that with the board, and some cases we could do more than others. When we're doing 4 examples and we turn around in 2 weeks and do another example, the pricing is still very high level. So I've been guilty in the past of giving rules of thumb, but giving a big asterisk of where we don't know exactly. On the design,
Let me interrupt you, Jay. I think one of your questions is about utilization, and I'm assuming you mean utilization of the facilities?
Correct, all the individual things.
Yeah.
The outdoor dining is probably not a big expense, but when you look at the weather around here and how much the outdoor dining we currently have is used, not that much. It's been raining, it's either raining or bugs or, windy. And that's not a big piece of the puzzle, so
My only comment is I don't think you can obviously guarantee a certain utilization in any of the facilities, except I think the process of design and programming before that really relied on lots of things, as you mentioned, staff input and how the club operates today, the survey results, best practices in the industry, experience from people like Jay or other clubs that were visited, and there was about, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, was there 3 or 4? 5 other clubs that had either constructed or operate similar facilities. And then Dave, and specifically I think as Dave came to Happy Hollow, he was able to lend his expertise as to how things should operate. So you're just combining all of those factors to make your best estimate that this is a good use of the club's resources. And that's just the process that went on. So I think that's the best answer for utilization, and some of it is you do have to make it flexible enough to adapt over time, which is kind of what we asked Jay to do as well. So.
The design of the building being compatible with this building, we tried to focus making the building compatible with the materials of this building is a very costly endeavor. And we do a lot of work with brick. We do a lot of restoration work. We use the National Park Service guidelines for historic preservation with a lot of our church clients, with a lot of our clients that take advantage of preservation tax credits. In this case, so you have kind of the bar of the building, which we've kind of referred to that as the pool functions. Let me get there. Which is this sort of zone right here. And that zone houses your chemicals for the pool, the vibration from the heater, heat, and then all of the locker rooms for the wet feet, which really want to be super durable. So it's a fairly conventional sort of approach to that. It's got a lot of masonry on the inside, durable. The options you have is what to do with the casual dining if it stays in the program, and what to do with the fitness. And we went through a whole gamut of fitness sort of options. We do, as a firm, we've designed a bunch of Aspen athletic clubs, TrueFit athletic clubs on one end. We're doing a $40 million facility for the city of Papillion right now, which is a fitness club that will open up, the field house will open up in a couple of months, and next year will be the interior. Again, we went through all those options of what's appropriate, what are options, what kind of flooring do you want to do, and then overlaid that with what's the expectations at Happy Hollow and how's it match budget-wise. So there's no magic to that. Sort of evolved out of that process.
Okay, thank you. This question is probably for the Friends of Happy Hollow and the board. But based on the fact that the reconsideration of this project came about because of a vote of the membership and a decision by the board to take a second look at it, since that decision has been made, has there been any areas of common agreement since then between the Friends of Happy Hollow and the board on the project?
I'm going to wander over here by Mr. Walker as chairman of the board. I would say, and then Tom, feel free to make comments. The process that was put in place at that July meeting was to do exactly this. So the conversation was, hey, let's pause, let's look at what we have proposed, and let's gather feedback from the entire membership, not just one faction or one group, and then let's come back to a project that we think makes sense for the majority of the membership. At that time, and Tom can comment further, the Friends of Happy Hollow group that was formed agreed, said, hey, we'll be part of the task force, we'll help with this process. And so I think the common agreement was, hey, let's do some of the things we didn't do as a club and a board, and we've said this more than once. The board did not solicit enough feedback from the membership or enough forums to ensure that when the project was proposed, there was good, solid agreement for the majority's sake. You'll never get 100%, but for the majority's sake that we had a project we could support. So there hasn't been further discussions, negotiating, so to speak, what's in and what's out and all that. It is a true engagement process that we're following. And so again, the task force will take all that, which includes some board members, some members at large, and the Friends of Happy Hollow group, and we'll come back and make a recommendation to what we believe is the best alternative project, whether it looks like this or something different for the club over the long term.
Perfect.
Yes, during your presentation earlier, you said you got input from the staff, the board, but didn't everybody talk about need for members? That's what I heard in your presentation, and I thought, isn't that one of the reasons we pulled back? And we wanted input from members, into this? How much member input have we had?
I think that was one of the primary reasons for doing exactly
Right,
this,
but
so you're correct.
he didn't indicate that would even happen.
Before July?
We were on it.
There was a whole committee.
There was a committee.
Well, what you just said as far as any input from the members is what we're engaging right now, I believe. One of the things I hope, I apologize for, right in that meeting last summer was I think we got a little blinded by it. Luckily or not, I've been part of this for 4 years. The year before, the board did I think the fourth year they did the survey. My years are all blended in anymore. I was on a committee that wasn't on the board, I was on a committee looking at this. And I think we just got our blinders on. We were so much looking at all these things get done, we forgot to do that. And so that is what this entire process is for. The people who identify themselves, Brad, as the Friends of Happy Hollow. We've got some folks on the task force that are represented. The silent people I have to bring up once in a while, this isn't vehemently against this at all. There are a great number of people who are totally for this vote. And so they're represented on the task force too. So as many people that have consternation about doing this, there's just as many that have consternation why it isn't done already. So it's kind of it's a country club thing we're going through. So as far as what our congregation wants, that's what we're trying to get through now. And this is just the beginning of it, folks. I hate to say survey, but there's going to be a couple more questionnaires coming out, and there's going to be more dialogue, and there's going to be, as the task force goes along, this should all be presented to memberships, and you should all have a chance to have your voice heard. Does that answer that a little better?
Yep.
Question?
Okay, so playground, did that get moved on this whole map scene, or did we get rid of it? Fitness, square footage, size, and then what are we doing with the fitness area downstairs?
My memory's not that good, Jay. Good luck.
Yeah, so the easy one is playground is being relocated, and there's lots of conversation with Dave and staff about how we accommodate more youth activities. So in addition to the playground, you saw the youth room come up, the nook for play before dining, which would have library books and small games. And then the overall size of the facility is flexible. And I think that's a good discussion right now to have. But the actual fitness, and Audrey can correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're still just under 2,000 square feet in the main cardio area. And I think our fitness studio is around 850 square feet. So by capacity, I think you could do, it would still be a comfortable room for one-on-one or one-on-two training with a personal trainer.
But is it bigger or smaller than the one downstairs right now?
Right now, yeah, considerably larger. Yeah,
Current's 1,400,
current's 1,400.
roughly.
And that doesn't include, obviously, we have men's and women's changing areas. We have, in the new facility, was programmed to have sauna, men's and women's. We have storage to pull things out of those main cardio spaces so that they can be used for multiple purposes. And then the kids' activity space, which is tied to that, is really a flexible space too. And as this building opens and we determine that there's a programmatic shift, that space is always considered the overflow for whatever we missed in this program, because obviously we want this building to serve the club well for 20, 25 years without a major renovation. So you try and squeeze in those sort of spaces that are flexible, and that kids area is one of them.
An old gym will be
Oh,
turned into...
yeah, so I can address that a little bit. There's been a number of conversations about that. I know we've started to sort of put a budget number, probably 6 months ago to what it would cost to renovate the fitness after it moves over. One of the conversations was, could it be converted into a card playing area? Has been discussed. There was an early look at if golf simulators would fit in that space, and I remember we talked about that. There's some ceiling limitations. There was at one time a conversation about could that be a casual dining area off of, from the Starlight or a private dining area. Those never really had any traction. But that space is, obviously would be back up for grabs.
Other questions, comments?
Hi, I'm Fred Amos, and I think this is the coolest thing we've had going for years, and I'm all for it.
Thank you.
I was curious, was an ice skating rink ever talked about? My son's club has one, and the hockey, it's so much fun to watch those kids playing hockey. And adults can use it other times. And indoor swimming pool. I know. That's just-
Can't we just use a
Well,
lake? We've got a lake
It's
down
a
there.
possibility.
Skate on it.
I'm not aware that those pieces of, or those uses were considered. Indoor pool, ice skating.
Well, they try to work it, so,
We thought about putting a dome over the pool too.
yeah,
That-
there we go.
One program element that wasn't discussed is we did talk about hitting bays, whether you do simulators inside or simulators that can have garage doors that open up and hit onto the golf course. That was discussed. One of the options showed tennis and golf in the current tennis shack location, sort of an expansion out on the practice green, which would allow golf to hit out. More recently, there's been conversations about is that necessary or not, simulators in or out. There's been a lot of conversation about the golf training aspect. I'll say fitness programmatically has changed a lot as well from the early conversations. Early on, it was always just it was almost taking what's in this building verbatim and sliding it over there in the first versions, and that's sort of changed as I think they've looked at other clubs of what's trending. No conversation I'm aware of though about ice skating.
Really?
Go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Elvin Larson. My wife and I are new to the club. We've been here about 5 years. I, like Fred, probably generally agree with the concepts of what we're trying to do to improve the needs of the members that are here. I guess as I sit and listen to this presentation, I get a little bit concerned. Is the design and the construction project and the wants list driving this whole agenda? Or do we really have somebody in the back that's looking at this as a business? And are we going to bring in more money that would have been spent in restaurants elsewhere in the city to eat here because they have new experiences, so that the net cost or the net revenue coming into the club increases with all this new wonderful space? Are we going to charge for the simulators? I mean, I, for one, would probably like the simulators, but are we going to charge for those? Because if we don't put a business pencil to this, and that's not something our architects can do for us, we have to do that. Our staff has to do that. And if we should say, are we going to increase revenue or are we going to increase overhead? Because if we don't increase general overhead, we don't maybe bring in more social members, what's that going to mean after this is all done? More cost or increases in our dues. And so what I think most people, they're experiencing their first big assessment, and it's fine, we're fine, we've already paid ours, but the question is, what happens a year or 2 or 5 years after this is done, and we have to have a significant increase because we haven't thought through some of the things I just questioned about. Do we have, I just want to be assured that the staff and the board and the friends are looking at this as a business and saying, okay, this is going to generate this kind of revenue or it's going to generate overhead. And if we don't add members, we're going to cover that overhead, then it's going to be a general increase in the revenue needs based through increased tone. Did I just put a wet blanket on this party?
I think, back up here. I think that's an absolutely legitimate concern. I know I joined the board in January of this year, and prior to my time joining the board, that very question was asked in a lot of detail. I know that the study of, okay, what does this do from a cost perspective, long-term debt, pressure on the membership, and how would that relate to future capital that we need to spend on other things, not just this. That was all considered. There was some pretty conservative projections of our overall budget for the 10-year period following this that assume membership losses and things that would sort of test the sensitivity to be able to afford this. And again, I'm not trying to suggest that someone wouldn't look at that and say, well, I don't like this assumption or that assumption, but I will tell you that when I arrived on the board, that information was pretty voluminous in terms of what study had been done to understand that impact. So as a new board member, I looked at that and said, we have some really smart people on the board who deal in the world of finance and managing businesses and so forth, and I felt good about it as a board member. That's all I can say from my perspective, but I do know that was a question that was asked early on in the process prior to 2018. Ted.
Yeah, to that point, Dave had a pretty good explanation, one of the earlier ones, about how the club functions and what the goals are, and I think that's worthwhile hearing from him. I do have a question is, does it increase the capacity for social membership by doing this? Because that would be interesting to know.
Thank you very much. I think from a standpoint, to answer your question, is absolutely was it looked at from a business standpoint. I moved my family here because of this project or this concept. Happy Hollow is very, very strong financially. And so what are we looking to do as a club? Are we happy to just keep the business model we currently have for the next 10 to 15 years? Or are we looking to ensure that the statement I just made happens for the next 20 to 30 years? And folks, I know that this is some folks that don't understand the concept of this. We are not just a golf club. And some people have come into my office and sat down and said, Dave, you're wrong. I said, boy, if it really was, I wouldn't be here. So I don't agree with that. We're not. We are a family club. I'm really sorry if you don't agree with me, but folks, we're a family club. But right now, we don't act like it completely. We don't have casual dining here. You may think we do, but we do not have casual dining. And so this answers a portion of that call. The other thing is the more diversified we can be with keeping golf as a focus, keeping food and beverage as a focus, that solidifies us in one business aspect of what the country club life is like. And right now, who can just say it as fast as we can, what is the number one thing we have to have for Happy Hollow to be successful? A consistent membership. Somebody said it. It's all about membership. It's not about what we're losing in the pool. It's not about what we're losing over there. Everything we do is a cost center here, and your dues pay for it. The dues are paid by member counts. We have to do things that make sure we're the club of choice in Omaha, period. Everybody else is doing it. If you look at Champions, they're making their renovations. I think Omaha Country Club maybe has a little bit different possible vision of what they're doing. But what we need to do is make sure that we are creating a Disneyland that people want to come and pay their dues to be entertained. And then it's our job to make sure that we entertain you. And so these concepts are not just fads. These are very strong industry trends that would help solidify Happy Hollow Club now and into the future for current membership, and then just as importantly for the future. That's my opinion. You can disagree with me, but that's what I believe.
Thank you, Dave. Other questions, comments?
Brandon?
Going forward, what's the process if somebody has an interest, let's say, in a fitness center or some other aspect? Who do they talk to or give to questions to people to get answers or concerns, what have you? And I assume that the end game is carries a lot of weight. And what I'm thinking is, take the fitness center. If you, build the building and then say, okay, we're going to put the equipment in. Well, some equipment is 8 feet, some may be 10 feet, and if you don't have the roof, then that equipment's not gonna be there. And I think personally that it's, I think with this kind of a fitness center, expanding what we've done, I think you're gonna see a lot of new people coming in with, driven by the fitness center. And so addressing getting new members.
I would just say, from my perspective, I think each of these amenities that we talk about either expanding or adding does have some purpose for drawing new members, or retaining members, replacing members, however you want to look at it. And I think that's a fair amount, and I'm not the expert in this industry, I rely on Dave a lot for this, but that's one of the things in the industry that is important now for clubs to continue to grow and enhance their position rather than go backwards. And that, I think, is pretty strong in the industry. And Dave, correct me if you would disagree, but I think all these features have there's some consideration for what that does in terms of drawing new members. Absolutely is a big part of the conversation in here.
Who should we contact if we have questions and what have you down here as we go down the road?
Certainly with questions, you can always start with Dave. I'm good at volunteering him. But then obviously the task force is here over the next few months to help take in feedback. We won't necessarily answer all the questions because we're trying to gather the feedback and then we'll come out, but we would love to hear your concerns or questions or confirmations, whatever it might be, directly to us. But as we've said, start with Dave. That's the easiest way to get that information to us, and he'll get us in direct contact if we need to. But anything you get to Dave will certainly end up in our hands and the board's hands as we go through this process. That's how it's been designed. Questions, others?
I have a question. Okay, at the May 31st count of our membership, we had 1,024 memberships. You've talked about a possible attrition with the assessment. Has that occurred yet? Number two is a clubhouse member can only use facilities within the clubhouse. Does that mean they won't be able to use the dining over there? And then the task force has minutes on the website for the 24th of July meeting that you held. Have you only met once?
Let me answer that one first.
I can answer that one first. We've met twice. We meet again this week. We'll approve the minutes from the previous meeting this week, and then we'll get them posted. So we're actually going to be in our third meeting that happens Wednesday. There's been a lot of communication between task force members in between meetings, but that's where we're at in the process. Our plan is to meet monthly at a minimum, and then in between, if we need interim meetings with each other, we do that as well.
You got the easy one. Membership was the first question. I want to say Jeff and I think everyone knows Jeff Tyson, who's our new CFO business manager. I think when Jeff and I started, we were at 1,050-ish members, ballpark, 1,045, and currently we're about 1,015, 1,015 or so. So normally our attrition is about 4% a year, and I want to say that we usually get 40 members a year. Golf membership is locked at 415, and I think we've had a wait list. We currently do not. We're at 410 members, and I think social members are down about 25 to 35 members. So really what's happened this year versus other years, obviously we announced the assessment, we announced the project, but you can see what kind of stalled. We don't have anything to sell. So that's our biggest challenge. If you're asking me professionally, and I started in 1989 right in high school and doing these things, we basically we told everybody in the community, don't join. Because we're not ready to go. What we're hoping is they all just wait. We don't want them to go somewhere else. We want them to wait till January, make sure that our entire membership is happy with the project we all go through, and then we hope we get 80 people to join or want to join as opposed to the 30 or 40 that didn't. And you had a middle question I missed. The clubhouse. And again, these are all things that would be discussed by the board. The way that it would work would be and this is, I'm mentioning with a couple of board members in here, the golf simulators would be for golf. The fitness center would be for social members. The dining, yes, if you were a dining member, you could use the casual dining. That would be my...
Clubhouse.
I'm sorry, climbing. We call it dining at the old club I was at. So clubhouse members would be able to dine there, yes. But you wouldn't be able to use the other aspects of that building.
But at our other meeting that we had back in June,
you had said that, yes, because the social membership can utilize the driving range and everything else, you would probably agree that they would be able to use the simulator.
I definitely misspoke if I said that, I apologize. No, so right now, it would be golf. Now, there is a potential that the board could decide to allow social members to use the golf simulators, but maybe it would be at a fee. It would be at some type of fee, but as of right now, unless I'm missing something, golf members would be the only ones that would be allowed to use the golf simulator room. If I did say that, I apologize. And again, that hasn't been decided yet because we don't even have them yet.
Hi, I just had an idea, my name is Sharon Kripe. I had an idea about trying to make the grill get better use. And if we made the menu, we've tried redecorating and several other things, lowering the ceiling, but maybe if we made the menu very casual, and then people who wanted to eat a more fancy menu could eat over in the dining room with the beautiful windows. And this menu would be very family friendly, like Sunday would be free Sundays for all kids. And Taco Tuesday, and Grab a Burger Wednesday, and Pizza Thursday. Just a total casual menu. And then the grill menu could be over for both the pub and over in the dining room. It's just an idea that, because I hate to see us losing money on the grill all the time and then building another restaurant.
I appreciate that suggestion. I'm not a food and dining expert, but I will say that one of the things the task force has looked at, and then we'll be considering that in the recommendations, is what are other options for repurposing the space? Kind of as Jay described, that was discussed early in the, or throughout the process, is how do you reuse that space, including, he said, making changes to how those facilities are sort of inviting for different groups. One of the pieces of feedback that we received really throughout the process, not just here recently, but really dating back to the spring, was that there was a concern that the Starlight isn't inviting for anything that's casual. And so to do the things you described to help that is part of the consideration for what we may come up with to include either casual dining in this facility somehow or casual dining in a new facility. So appreciate your comments. That's something we're considering, because we believe we've got to find a way to consider casual dining very seriously. We just don't know what that looks like yet.
So I would echo your point, though, is that this is not necessarily menu. I have a young family, and it's more putting on a collared shirt and tucking in your shorts and, having to come up here that isn't very inviting. And so a separate space where you can be in sports clothes and your sweaty stuff you just played tennis in is, as a mother of young kids, much more appealing than coming up into a clubhouse, which frankly feels a little stuffy to little kids.
Absolutely. I think that's feedback we have gotten as well, that regardless of how you would repurpose the use, unless you do something fairly dramatic to change that sort of appearance, and that those restrictions on the things you just mentioned, dress and, sort of what you're coming from, and even behavior to some degree, which is, got pretty young kids too, I understand that. It could be difficult to do in this facility. And I believe that through the discussions the board had over the last year and a half, that was a big piece of the conversation, is can you physically do it in this facility, and then can you manage it from an operations standpoint as well, and make sure that everybody has the options to dine in the way they want to, which I know that's one thing Dave identified early on, is you, as a club, so I'm learning from him, as a club, you want to provide different options, and you want to dine in different ways. And so this is part of the challenge, is how do you accomplish all of that in one or more facilities? So absolutely.
My name is Tom McGowan, and I'm a 53-year member currently at the Omaha Country Club, and a 12 and 15-year member here. I guess would it be safe to say, if you were to come up with a timeline, This whole project is going to run a year late.
The plan that was originally contemplated in May was to start right now, as we speak. And so given the pool season that begins in May and ends in September, I think there's some likelihood it is a year late. We have talked, or a year delayed. We have talked about, is there a way to phase it so you could start in the spring of 2019 and gain 3 or 4 months on the front side? Obviously, the disruption to the pool activities when you were getting started could be too much. We may or may not want to deal with that, but until we understand what the project scope is, I think we'll wait on that decision until we get there.
Jay, would it be safe to say that a year delay would probably cost us 5 to 6% increase in cost? Even if we downsize it, it's still going to be taken up.
If you build the same thing. Yeah, I think it's a question about escalation of prices, and I think there's a couple of smart guys behind you who can give you specifics on escalation, but everything costs more the longer we wait if you build the exact same thing. But I think you should challenge the task force, and therefore then us, to come up with some ways to find some of that so you're not penalized by this additional engagement. There's obviously some programmatic things that could be right-sized, and by that I mean reduced in scope to save some costs. There always are to overcome that.
I think that's absolutely, we did talk about that as a board when this process got started, is there is a likelihood that you have some escalation in prices, especially in today's environment for construction. We could just beat Duke up over the pricing and see what happens, but
Not me. Yeah, beat me up over it.
our general contractor partner is NGC, not Dartmouth. So.
Charge them.
Meant to be a negative question either, and it's never probably going to happen, but you know, I remember looking at some of these things, and I think the projected interest rates going forward maybe a high of 6%. And if we look back in the late 70s and 80s when interest rates got up to 14%, which is probably never going to happen again, but let's say they get up to 10 or 12%, will everything work out as projected? Pretty much so. Are we that healthy that it's not going to be an issue?
I don't know if I know the answer to the sensitivity on the interest rate question. Do you guys?
I mean, who knows what's going to happen with the interest rates? I mean, we've worked with Union Bank, and we are going to put it out for bid once we get a defined project. And we've budgeted for, boy, I wish Happy was here. Not at I think the budget we budgeted for was, I guess, 6%, 6.25%, which is still high right now. So they tried to do a lot of different tests on it as far as a loss of membership, also the higher interest rates, those types of things, to do our best to make sure we projected.
Didn't that only on 40% leverage anyway?
Mr. Witt, do you want to get into this conversation? He was a big part of this, so he's sitting there quietly. We're going to put him on the spot.
Oh, sure.
You're pretty shy, so this microphone's going to be hard.
Okay. We did a lot of different analysis of that. We ran our projections with 6.5% interest rate, and as Duke said, you know, we're borrowing 60% of it, and 40% of it's raised through the assessment. So we did a lot of testing. We did a lot of membership reduction. We think we sensitivity test that pretty hard. Yeah, if it goes from 4 to 12. We got issues way beyond our interest rate. We got members quitting, we got all kinds of things going on, and those would be issues. I mean, there's no absolute guarantee that everything would run as smooth as ever because we're relying on full membership. But I mean, those things happen, we wouldn't have full membership. As was mentioned earlier, what's most important to the entire length of the project is full membership. The higher the membership, the more dues, the faster everything gets paid off. And I think Dave believes and the board believes that to have full membership, we have to get more amenities because we have to recruit young families who now with you know, it's not the man in the family deciding to join Happy Hollow, it's the family deciding to join Happy Hollow, and they want their family taken care of. So that's the future of the club, according to me. Right, Dave?
That's what I believe.
Right. So that's where the board's been.
Thank you. Okay, we are almost up against the clock, 7:28. We'll do one quick question and then I'll let everybody go. And if you want to stick around and chat a little more, we're certainly willing to do that. So.
You're not going to like my question. As he said,
and as we learned from Dave, it's the women supposedly that are making the decision with regard to what club to join, yet the task force is comprised of 100% men, and the board is comprised of 100% men. What's the game plan?
You're correct on both accounts.
One time out though, a little defense, Katie.
Women
We
appear
had
to
a
be
task force 2
restricted
years ago,
to-
had 3 women on it, because last year did this, had 4 women on it. I'm just gonna say, it in fairness,
Okay.
in fairness.
But what's
And
the
we've tried to
current
recruit
game
women the
plan?
past 2 years on the board. There is a, we'll say, stupid rule that the member has to be on the board. It's an old bylaw, well, it's an old article. And when you join,
Right.
Who's a
I was
member?
the legacy, and I
Yeah.
write the checks, and yet.
but we
I
want
still
women on the
have-
board and we want women on task force. I really
So
do.
what is your plan to make that happen?
We've had them on task force, and there better be one on this next year. We tried recruiting 2 last year, both declined. I get a little edgy when someone just throws that out, because it's happened. We've tried. Dave, am I fair on that one? Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone for attending, and again, we'll stick around for a few minutes, but we appreciate your time, and we'll be in touch with more communication as we go. Thank you very much.